Hey guys, it's Graham. Welcome back to Trucker Man Reads. What's cracking? Today I finished listening to the very long audiobook of the first of 3 volumes in Shelby Foote's The Civil War History, a narrative of the Civil War. I don't ever remember what the exact title is, and I've read, probably close to a dozen books on the Civil War, including biographies and stuff. So, sometimes the titles run together in my head. But he published this massive 3-volume analysis, or whatever you want to call it, of the entire conflict. This first one covers everything from the initial events at Sumter all the way up through Perryville. The print edition is 852 pages. The audiobook is 42 hours. So there's a lot of detail packed into this sucker. I'd heard of Shelby Foote before. He also wrote a book about the Battle of Shiloh that I read earlier this year, kind of as a primer for his writing. And in the tech world that we live in, where all of the apps on your phone all spy on each other to optimize your experience or whatever, one of my Instagram reels that I saw last night was from a Shane Gillis special where he was talking about the Ken Burns Civil War documentary and saying that then this guy Shelby Foote popped up and he was obviously rooting for the South and he was just making up anecdotes. And I don't know what the Ken Burns documentary is all about. I haven't seen it. Like, I know who Ken Burns is, but I haven't watched that one. My supposition is that if Shelby Foote is sharing an anecdote about the Civil War, it's probably because he is extremely familiar with it. It would be like me sharing an anecdote about Plymouth, just because it's a subject that fascinates me and I've read a lot about it. Maybe Shelby Foote was making something up. I don't know. After reading this first book in a 3-volume set, I'm inclined to think that no, like, the dude just knows. You don't write and compile a book that's this long, full of conversations between officers and anecdotes from soldiers in this battle at this place at this time, like over and over and over, just getting into the very nitty gritty of it, the day-to-day of it from both sides without really knowing what you're talking about. And all love to Shane Gillis. The dude is hilarious, and he does know a fair bit of history. His primary purpose is to be a comedian. So let's laugh at the comedians and learn history from the historians. And sometimes the twain shall meet, and that's fine. Just understand what one is and what the other is. What are the main things that I learned from this book? Well, Foote starts at the beginning with the election in 1861. 1860, 1861. It was 1860. He took office in 1860. Oh wait. Was that still when they would hold the election in March or something? I can't freaking remember. But he starts with the initial election of Abraham Lincoln and covers the fact that he didn't win a single electoral vote in the South, and the South was wary of his intentions with regard to their peculiar institution, which was slavery. And if this is the first Graham Bradley video you're watching, let me be completely unequivocal about this. The institution of slavery had to end because, what have I said before, children? It is antithetical to the principles of liberty. I am not a defender of slavery by any stretch of the imagination. Nevertheless, based on my reading of the Civil War, I understand positions that are sympathetic to the South because it wasn't exclusively over slavery that the conflict came to a head. I know we have this popular view of it where the South was being racist and the North said, stop being racist and free all the slaves. And the South said, no, shut up. We like having slaves and they're not human and whatever. Like, it is significantly more complicated than that. And Foote gets into all of those factors that came to a head with Lincoln's election. And specifically the fact that the South, for the first time since the country's inception, really felt like they had no executive representation. Seeing some of the arguments and the things put forth from that time period, it's very reminiscent of the back and forth that you've had between the right and the left and their responses to various presidents getting elected over the last several cycles. Like the right didn't accept Obama as their president on ideological grounds. And sure, you had people in there who didn't accept him on racial grounds, whatever. It's not the complete picture to say it either way. Some were ideological, some were based on principles and philosophies and politics, and others they just didn't like that there was a black guy president. There are several reasons for doing so, and hyper focusing on just one of them paints an incomplete picture of the discord. And that same thing is true of why the South was ultimately ripe for secession. Lincoln didn't want to abolish slavery; he wanted to preserve the Union, and so he was inclined to quash secession and make sure that the southern states stayed in the Union. And so the nation then went on to have a 4-year fight that killed 600,000 people to decide whether they actually were going to succeed or not. With getting all the way up to the Perryville portion of the war, you start to see the way that the conflict transformed, and the fact that the South they were very limited on an economic basis. There's even one part where he says that the Southern soldiers got so tired of eating, apples and green corn and salt, and that was pretty much what so many segments of the CSA had to sustain themselves, and it ended up giving them diarrhea. They were all sick from it just because that was all that they had to eat. There was some soldier that said that CSA stands for corn, salt, and apples, just because it was the only thing that they had to eat. Economics just played a huge role in the undoing of the South in the Civil War at large. But even that would be disingenuous to say that was the deciding factor. It was such a complex conflict, and there were so many factors that worked for and against both sides that it's a small wonder that it dragged on for as long as it did. And I've still got 2 volumes of this thing to chew on. In getting to the end of this particular audiobook, there were two episodes I would say that stood out to me. Towards the end of George McClellan's tenure as the leader of the Army of the Potomac, the Northern Army, the Union Army, effectively, he has this, obviously well-deserved and well-recorded reputation for being the military commander who just wouldn't do anything. And Lincoln was begging McClellan to actually go on the offensive and actually take this military that you've got and do something against the CSA. But McClellan was notoriously indecisive and reluctant to actually fight. And he had plenty of opportunities to do so. And Lincoln eventually got so fed up with him that he took command away from him and put somebody else in charge of the army. It eventually came to be Grant, but this was a long and drawn out process. What Shelby Foote highlights is just how much McClellan's own men were loyal to him and were saddened to see him basically kicked out of that post, and even tried to intercept the train that he was on and say no, come back, don't leave. And McClellan's no, this is, we've got to follow orders. And I would have thought that, there wasn't anybody that actually cared about this guy as a commander, but he did have the loyalty of his men. And Foote even went on to include a quote from Robert E. Lee about the caliber of McClellan as a man and as an officer. The more that you read about the Civil War, the more you're going to see things like that pop up where, you had the rank and file, the soldiers on the ground, who tended to hate each other and snipe at each other, but the officers had tremendous respect for each other. As I said after reading Rebel Yell in 2020, when Stonewall Jackson died, both sides of the war mourned him. You don't get there with this simplistic 21st century public school education view of what the Civil War was. You just don't. You can't. Another thing that I thought was interesting was, before Grant got put completely in charge of the Union Army, so he was he was an off and on alcoholic throughout his career. Ron Chernow documented that in his biography, and it's come up in every other account that I've read about the man. Like, and there were times during the Civil War when he was on the wagon, and other times when he was off the wagon. And during one spell where it was highly suspected by Lincoln that Grant was hitting the sauce again, a lot of his correspondence was like hyper fixated on like, hey, we shouldn't trust Jews. If we've got any Israelites in the government or in the military in the chain of command, like they're sneaky. I don't like them. Kick them out. I'm like, dang, dude, you're about 170 years early for freaking 4chan. But I think it's worth mentioning only because it's a testament to Shelby Foote's commitment to being complete in his perspective and assessment of the Civil War, of the entirety of the conflict. Showing the virtues and shortcomings of men and officers on both sides, painting a complete picture. I'm glad that I'm done reading it, just because it's a freaking huge book. And again, I got 2 more of these. I'm not going to get to them this year. I might pick at them in the years to come. But I'm very impressed with Shelby Foote's thoroughness and his ability to just write well and write objectively and comprehensively. Yes, he's a Southerner. I think that it's a disservice to write him off as a Southern sympathizer. If anything, I'd say that the majority of platformed historians take a pro-unionist view, which it's just incomplete. To the clamorers in this day and age that want to say, hey, they should have executed all those traitors and whatever. It's like the officers in the army that beat the South did not want to do that. They were the ones who were there. They were the ones that did the fight. Go read Ron Chernow's book on Grant, and specifically the chapter where General Lee surrenders at Appomattox. And it just, see what Grant was going through and what he was weighing and what he was chewing on when all that happened. Like, there's a reason why they didn't want to subjugate the South and obliterate them. It wasn't about defeating an enemy. It was about ending a conflict and working towards unity. That's another point that was driven home in Samuel Meacham's book about Nathan Bedford Forrest, a man whose family, 4 generations, had been in the slave trade, a man who traded in slaves and joined the Ku Klux Klan, not for racism reasons and stuff, but for nationalism reasons. And then he backed off his activity when the majority of it became a racial thing, and this was post-Civil War. And he's like, no, we've already had a fight over this. We're not doing this anymore. Like, he went through the Civil War, and his views on the value of a human soul transcended skin color as a result of that conflict. And he wasn't the only one. And he made a great effort afterward, after the war was over, to proliferate that viewpoint. This is a guy who learned the right things from the conflict and was changed as a result of it. There's hardly a chance that he was the only one. And so the outcome of the Civil War, by and large, was to change Americans' attitudes about a whole lot of things, I guess. Sorry about that. I guess I will refine my views on those things when I do eventually get around to reading the next couple of volumes. But I've got a lot of other stuff to tackle in the meantime. My next big book to read, it's 25 hours in audio, but I do have a very nice first edition of it in hardcover, is Admiral of the Ocean Sea by, what's the author's name? Samuel Eliot Morison? Could be wrong about that. It's about Christopher Columbus, and since Columbus Day is coming up in a couple of weeks, I wanted to get that one read ahead of time, so I'll start picking my way through that one. But anyhow, hearty endorsement for Volume 1 of Shelby Foote's Civil War history. Drive safe. See you out there.